Hello, my name is Reva Bhalla, and today I'm joined by Stratfor's lead military analyst, Paul Floyd, to discuss some recent military activity in the Middle East. Paul, we had some very interesting activity on Sunday with Israeli airstrikes in Syria. Do we have a better sense of what was targeted in that attack?
So we've had multiple reports, and it's ranged from everything from various types of missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. We've even had our own sources talking about Iranian aircraft being damaged in the transfer, to some reports claiming that it was Syrian air defense units that were attacked. What seems clear, though, is that Israel's following the pattern that is established over the last 2 years or several years during the Syrian civil war, which is it's striking in Syria when it wants to make sure that weapons don't get into the hands of actors such as Hezbollah or the rebels that could affect its own territory. So it's still following this very clear pattern and this Israeli security doctrine. What we don't see is Israel attacking regime targets that's degrading the regime's ability to actually and allowing the rebels to take territory from the regime. Because to a point, Israel has an interest in maintaining a balance of power because the rebels maintain as much of a threat to Israel proper if they had control of the entire area as the regime itself.
Although the Syrian regime loves to claim that Israel is backing the rebels, and that's a way to sort of undermine the credibility of rebel factions. But yeah, I think this is very focused on actual weapon systems that Israel simply doesn't want to have in the hands of Hezbollah. And geography matters here, right? Because this isn't just a doctrine we've seen play out in Syria, but as we saw 2 years ago with an Israeli airstrike in Sudan on a weapons shipment headed toward Hamas. This is something where we see Israel paying close attention to where it can strike, and preferably in locations where the threat of retaliation would be lower.
Yeah, they're very much proactive and offensive in a defensive mindset. Just because in their minds, because they have such a small territory, they can't afford to have anything happen on their soil. So they very much are willing to reach out when they have the proper intelligence and strike at things that could be potential threats.
So better to strike at Syria against a distracted regime versus in Lebanon with Hezbollah right on your northern border, in Sudan versus Egypt where things get politically complicated.
Absolutely.
So back to the target set, though, we had alerted our readers that the revelation that Iran had transported missile systems, the Fatah 110 missiles in particular, to Hezbollah, something that both Hezbollah and Iran openly claimed, that would likely result in a preemptive Israeli strike. Lo and behold, we saw the strikes this past weekend. So what exactly is so concerning about these missiles in particular?
Specifically, it's the range. And the range combined with the accuracy. The idea that Hezbollah specifically, or any actor that is waging war against Israel, could have the ability to, with over 300 kilometers of range, reach basically any strategic target in Israel and hit it with a certain amount of accuracy is to a point intolerable. And so again, Israel, if it has the intelligence and has the ability to preempt that and stop that, especially in Syria, which is that logistical trail from Iran, it makes perfect sense.
So the timing of this shipment was also very interesting, right? With Iran and Hezbollah openly acknowledging that these missiles have been transferred and coming right after we saw the nuclear negotiation extension between Iran and the P5+1. You would think that this would put the U.S. in a difficult position. At the same time, it's negotiating with Iran. Iran is engaging in what appears to be a very provocative mood. But there does seem to be something below the surface there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think one way to look at it is remember that Iran and all of its interests in this larger Shia arc, it's under a lot of stress. It's proxy regime in Syria or its supportive regime in Syria is lost a ton of territory and is now a shell of its former self, and that directly threatens supply lines to Hezbollah, its most important military proxy. So in a way, and Hezbollah itself is also very much engaged in that Syrian civil war because of this existential threat to itself and its supply lines. So in many ways, this could be posturing for Iran and Hezbollah to kind of provide deterrence to Israel to a certain degree, to say, hey, they do have these weapons and these capabilities, and we're openly admitting it. So you understand that. So you understand the pain of attacking us, because many schools of thought, this might actually be the appropriate time for Israel to be very proactive against Hezbollah because it's so committed in different regions, they could destroy portions of it in detail. So this, in many ways, could be deterrence.
It reminds me of a situation back in Operation Cast Lead, where when we saw those longer range missiles being employed by Hamas, something that we heard from one of our sources within Hamas was that there was a lack of control by Hamas over the decision to actually deploy those missiles. And that was something that, of course, escalated the conflict very rapidly. And so I would think that as Iran is broadcasting that it is transferring these missiles, it would also be quietly telegraphing to the United States and Israel that it is the one to still hold control over these arsenals when they're in country, in possession of its allies. And that's a form of leverage that could come in handy.
Absolutely. It's just, it's a very dangerous form of leverage. Weapons, while they can be very symbolic, still very much have capability, and that can't be ignored. So it's a very fine line between deterring and then or being so threatening that then you force action from Israel in this case. So Iran is playing a very, very delicate game.
And Iran is also walking a very delicate line in Iraq as well, right, where we see this offensive against Islamic State. And of course, there's common interest between the U.S. and Iran in intelligence coordination, for example, even if both sides go to extremes to deny it. So as we look out in the months ahead and, big milestones like an operation to retake Mosul, which is in the cards but will take time to build up, what does that U.S.-Iranian coordination actually look like when it comes to a military offensive like that?
So there absolutely is cooperation, but it's such a broad term you have to define what cooperation is in this case. And we've seen very much that Iran and the U.S. have denied this cooperation at any levels. But the fact is we know Iran is taking direct military action in Iraq, and so is the U.S. If you have two military units working in close proximity, there has to be cooperation. Otherwise, they'd be shooting each other, basically. It's simple, but it's true. So past that, what you're really seeing then is the way they cooperate. In this case, it seems to be geographical. The U.S. has kind of quietly agreed to operate in certain parts of Iraq, while Iran is kind of operating in its own place. In this case, Iran has been using, both the Iraqi Shiite brigades and its own Quds force and its commanders that are advising and in some cases airstrikes in a lot of the places that are closest to Iran on the border. So the southern part of the KRG, Diyala province, everything along that eastern side of Iraq, really where they have proximity and they have interest, where Islamic State kind of pushed down and wedged between Baghdad and the KRG. The U.S., on the other hand, has been very much more active, like in the Sunni areas, both in Anbar and the northern portions of the KRG. And so that seems to kind of be where that agreed upon cooperation split is taking place. Past that, when you talk about a place like Mosul, that level of cooperation gets real sticky, because if you start bringing in basically Shia forces into Mosul, trying to cooperate with both Peshmerga and Iraqi security forces into this Sunni bastion, you could be exacerbating the problem versus fixing it, and basically having the broader Sunni community again throw in its lot.
Which is not in the interest of either Washington nor Tehran. So again, another point of cooperation potentially. So we'll see as both sides respect that line, that geographic line in Iraq. But this is certainly a trend that we'll be watching in 2015.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Paul. And thank you all for joining us.